Frank Sinatra said, "The best revenge is massive success." What's a real-life example of this? Michael has a great story about when he started out. Some big wheel at the network didn't like him for the role of Alex P. Keaton on Family Ties. He was too short, not cute, not heartthrob enough. You're never going to see his face on a lunchbox. But the producer cast him anyway, and the show shot to #1 and stayed there. Fox sent him a Family Ties lunchbox with his face on it, and then Back to the Future 1, 2, 3 lunchboxes. The guy who invented Ring cameras went on Shark Tank and was rejected by everyone. They all thought it would fail. You know the rest. George Lucas got the ownership of the toy rights to Star Wars because they don't think it would be successful. He made an absolute killing on those. Frasier, you know the expression, living well is the best revenge. Niles, it's a wonderful expression. I just don't know how true it is. You don't see it turning up in a lot of opera plots. Ludwig, maddened by the poisoning of his entire family, wreaks vengeance on Gunther in the third act by living well. Frasier, all right, Niles. Niles, whereupon Wotan, upon discovering his deception, wreaks vengeance on Gunther in the third act again by living even better than the Duke. Ron McNair had the police called on him when he was little because he was black and reading in a library. He grew up to be an astronaut, and the library he was kicked out of was later named after him. Brendan Fraser getting the Oscar this year after being blacklisted from Hollywood for over a decade for speaking out about being sexually assaulted. Italian industrialist, builder of tractors, made a mint out of it and rewarded himself with a new Ferrari. Ferrari broke down. Needed a new clutch. Wealthy industrialist waited patiently for his new clutch to arrive, and after many weeks it finally showed up. Same clutch he was putting in his tractors, more than twice the price. A little bit annoyed at this, he rang Ferrari to complain. They told him, go back to building tractors, leave supercars to us. And Lamborghini was born. Jennifer Hudson lost American Idol and became more successful than the winner. When Lady Gaga was in college, some of her classmates had a Facebook group called Stephanie Germanotta, You'll Never Be Famous. Pretty sure she proved them wrong. Nothing to do with the question asked, but my favorite Sinatra story is him asking a waiter what's the biggest tip he ever received. $200, Mr. Sinatra. Yeah, well, here's $300. By the way, kid, who gave you a $200 tip? You, Mr. Sinatra. Erin French, chef owner of restaurant The Lost Kitchen in rural Maine. Co-owned a restaurant in the town of Belfast with her husband. A very tumultuous relationship ended with him changing the locks on the building with all of her equipment inside. She licked her wounds, leased space in an old mill building in her tiny hometown of Freedom, and built from the ground one of the best restaurants in the country, with a coveted reservation that is fabled for its difficulty to get a table. Has her own multi-season documentary on TV and is absolutely killing it in the culinary world now. Harlan Ellison sent every writing award he received to one of his old professors that said he'd never be successful. Blockbuster laughed baby Netflix out of the room with their idea. Then later, grown-up Netflix killed Blockbuster. There was a multi-millionaire, like hundreds of dollars of millions from where I am from, that applied for membership at a country club, was turned away because of some random rich country club rule. Anyway, a few years later the country club was wanting to expand its golf course and was going to buy up the neighboring properties. This guy decided to go ahead and outbid the country club and buy up the properties himself. He turned into your generic McMansion suburbia, but still. That's the sort of passive-aggressive fuck you money I one day hope to have. The TV networks who turned down showing Breaking Bad on their networks. AMC picked it up and never looked back. Lucille Ball auditioned for the part of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. After getting rejected by the studio producer, she met Desi Arnaz and became one of the most influential stars in the world. The revenge, she founded her company Desilu and set up shop in the same office the producer rejected her in. David Tepper, after being passed on for partner multiple times at Goldman Sachs, decided to go work for himself. A few decades later he bought his ex-boss's house John Corzine in the Hamptons for $43 million. He then proceeded to demolish the thing and put up an even more expensive mansion. Groups of guitars are on the way out, a recording executive at Decca told the Beatles in 1962. We don't like their sound. Groups of guitars are on the way out. My ex was going to divorce me after I retired to try and get a percentage of my retirement pay. Evidently this had been a plan for a while. Her best friend sent me screenshots of her plan and I used it for my divorce. She got nothing. I'm happily married to my best friend, financially stable, with all the free time I could want. Edit a word. In the 1960s, Ford wanted to buy Ferrari. Just before they closed the deal, Ferrari slammed the door on them and let themselves be bought by Fiat. Ford, then, designed an entirely new supercar, beat Ferrari at the 24 Hours of Le Mans from 1966-1969, and Ferrari hasn't won that race since against any other car manufacturer. And for the icing on the cake, 50 years later, Ford entered again after not competing since the 70s, and won again. My wife is always talking shit about how good she is at Candyland. When our daughter was old enough to play we bought the game and I won 4 games in a row. I've never done meth but I imagine that is what that rush feels like. One of my best friends in college was unpopular. The guys on my floor thought he was a dork and dismissed him. 5 years after graduating he joined a .com as employee number 3. As the company grew he hired his friends, me included. 10 years after graduation he retired on his .com wealth. I love reconnecting with people from college and letting them know that I'll be retired at 35. The subtext is that if they'd been nicer to him they could have made millions. Tina Turner. She got away from an abusive husband with virtually no assets and went on to become a solo superstar. Moved out of my abusive mother's and stepdad house at 18. Had my own apartment at 18, bought my own house at 21. They kept telling everyone I was a drug addict, face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy. I worked as CFO for a private company, and after 5 years of poor ownership and family meddling I was let go with no notice or severance, while they owed me tens of thousands of dollars in back pay, expenses, revenue share etc. I was on the verge of bankruptcy. I won my lawsuit and have a judgment against him and his company which I know I will never collect on. 7 years later I started my own company in the same competitive space. Following his most recent divorce he's about $2.7 million in debt. My company was just valued at $100 million as we move into our 4th year. Guy in my class in middle school was always sleeping from staying up late playing Halo 2. He was really good, like travel to tournaments and win them on weekends good. The teacher said enjoy your video games now because you'll be flipping burgers for life. He bought himself and his parents' houses at 19 from YouTube streaming money. Working on the Shrek movie was a massive punishment as executives didn't believe in it and would Shrek underperforming animators. Sports commentators criticized Lamar Jackson for holding on the Ravens and said that he'd never be able to get a deal done without an agent. As of a few hours ago, he signed a new contract worth $260 million. He's now the highest paid player in NFL history. Freaks and Geeks got cancelled by NBC. Judd Apatow then made it his mission to make every single teen actor on the show a massive star both in front of and behind the camera. Post Malone becoming absurdly famous for writing songs about a girl that left him. When I was 13 my uncle called me an ungrateful little boy and said I will amount to nothing, be a little SLT, and proceeded to push me against a door that had a nail sticking out which stuck into my back. Many years later, I completed college, worked my way to a government career, bought a home, didn't fall into the trap of having several kids and being on welfare like most of my family. He literally pushed me into success.